Will support for Steam change the game for Chromebooks?
And is juicing phones for benchmark scores still really a problem?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined, as always, by the hardest working man in podcasting, Alex Kidman. Alex, Netflix has announced that it's getting serious about cracking down on account sharing, trialing a system that would charge users extra if it detects that they're using the brother-in-law principle. So, Alex, would you pay extra for Netflix so your family could mooch off your account?
Well, no. I mean, you've met my family. Um, but I
Tight ass
think
Gus if you're listening.
look, it's an interesting step, if only because where they're trialing, which is basically South America, and the price they're charging is less than the tier pricing on Netflix. So, like going from standard def to high def to 4K. And legitimizing it that way makes it kind of interesting because you could say, right, to the brother in law or to whoever, right, we'll pay the extra. It's about $4 a month after conversion of what they're trialing.
Yeah.
We'll pay that, split it. It's still cheaper Netflix for both of you, and it's on the level. So I can see the appeal, but I can also see it coming crashing down when people start traveling again, and suddenly they're being told, "Hey, we don't think this is your Netflix account anymore."
It seems to go against the whole idea of you shouldn't do that. Oh, actually, we will let you do it if you pay a bit more money. So, speaking of mooches, we're joined again in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by a man with pure Android running through his veins. It's EFTM's Dan Tyson. Dan, have you ever shared a Netflix password, and would you pay for the privilege?
Off the record, yes. No.
To which question?
Well, look, I've already cleared out the virtual green room, so yes, definitely mooching. But I currently have two people on my account who don't technically live here, so that's certainly in the future. It comes down
They're
to the
getting
enforcement
disconnected in
policy.
3, 2, 1, gone.
Reset passwords on all accounts. But yeah, I mean, as you say, Alex, like it's that option. Like it's less than the tier pricing to go up a level. It's also less than the price of a whole Netflix subscription if they were to go out on their own. So, I mean, when it comes down to pure economics, it's a great deal. Whether you want to then actually go, well, just because my father's not living in the same house, I'm going to pay $4 for him. It's a bit fine line. Comes down to the enforcement policy. Like, are we going to see like me watching some Stranger Things here at home in the morning, catching a flight up to Brisbane, logging into Netflix, and suddenly, boom, I'm done. But yeah, so that's that travel thing. Yeah.
So it's a big week in Google and Android news, and naturally, Dan was the man to talk to get behind the headlines. First up, Google announced that Valve's PC gaming service, Steam, is coming soonish to Chromebooks. Dan, is this a big deal?
Yeah, absolutely. Steam is obviously one of the biggest repositories of games in the world, and it ranges from anything from really low-end games up to your like Crisis, Cyberpunk, all that sort of high-end gaming. And really, I mean, a lot of these Chromebooks can run these games that are on the lower end of the spectrum, and this really just adds that whole window into making it a lot easier for people to access their gaming library, which is fantastic. Especially for us here in Australia, where some of our cloud gaming choices aren't as great as the rest of the world, and obviously not quite there yet on some of the services. So, yeah, Steam on Chromebooks, absolutely.
See, I'm going to disagree with you there, Dan. Partially because of the nature of the Chromebooks that mostly sell here in Australia, because most of the Chromebooks that sell here in Australia are under the spec that Google's talking about for Steam on Chrome OS. You actually need your real high end. You kind of what I tend to think of as your silly money Chromebooks. They're very nice hardware that almost feels like it's underutilized by Chrome OS right now. And so they're kind of hard to justify. They're kind of hard to say, hey, go out and buy this $900 one. It'll do the same thing as the $200 one. It's just got a nicer box around it.
So while I agree with you, yeah, the initial list of Chromebooks is pretty limited, and as you say, it's pretty high end. It's like 11th gen Intel CPU required and stuff like that. The flip side to that is I've had Steam running on the Crostini Linux petition on very low end Chromebooks, and it runs like a dream. So the initial rollout is very likely going to be very high end, high level Chromebooks. But the actual software will definitely run on a lot lower Chromebooks. So that's something that I'm sort of looking forward to. But I absolutely agree with you. The initial run is very high end, and also on these Chromebooks that, let's be honest, in our market just don't sell.
Yeah. I think the other problem there, though, is also that kind of expectation around what it's going to play. Because you're right, Linux based Steam's been a thing for a long, long time, but a bit like Mac based Steam, it's a subset of what the PC version does. It's generally not those higher end games. Now, I'm someone, as the regular listeners will know, who loves an older game, a simpler game, and that's great bringing it to that. I think the other problem I have with it, maybe this is just me, to me, the whole thing of the Chromebook is it's cloud based, it's online. You're not really storing too much of anything on the device because that way you can power wash it whenever you like if something goes wrong or whatever. Whereas this is going to be more your local install, locally running thing, for which, again, the hardware is not necessarily there, but also the storage isn't there because most Chromebooks don't really think, hey, I need a 1 terabyte drive because typically you don't.
Yeah, definitely in the lower end, absolutely, you don't get those drives, but higher end, that's obviously where we're going here. 1 terabyte is definitely an option on some of those devices. So crossing over the divide between a cloud-based OS, Chrome OS in the last few years has definitely got a lot more local, but it's still very much primarily, as you say, in the cloud. So storage is an option if you want to, I've used some of the petitions to actually section off in mine, but it's also a real pain in the ass to actually install Steam on Linux. So this is more about making it easier for them, but they've still got this big barrier of how much grunt do you actually need to run it.
So, will this get more people off the fence? Do you think this will actually sell more Chromebooks?
I think it's going to be a lot of kids are going to get excited about it because they've obviously got their Chromebooks for school, and they're in for a world of disappointment when they find out the admins disabled any of that sort of fun stuff. So in that respect, there's going to be excitement for it, but it's going to quickly run into a wall of reality when they look at the device specs needed for it, the storage, all that sort of stuff. And then, obviously, once you get into Steam, whether the actual game is designed to run in the Linux version of Steam, because it is still that. And there's not a lot there for some of these games. So, excitement, yes. Reality, possibly not.
If Steam's not the real deal breaker, then what would you say is the biggest thing holding Chromebooks back? Biggest thing making people go, oh, I don't think so. I'll go Mac or PC.
You tend to just run into walls. Like a lot of I have run Chrome OS on Chrome boxes, Chromebooks, and stuff like that to run editing software for videos, Photoshop, and all that sort of stuff. Like you can use online alternatives. They're not great. Photop.com. I'm giving it a plug. I love that site. Absolutely Photoshop on the web. Video editing, on the other hand, no. It is a terrible, terrible experience. And that you do
You're
run
being
into
too kind.
Absolutely. If I could go lower, I would. But yeah, it's one of those things you do eventually run into some barriers where it's a far easier prospect to actually use a Mac or a Windows machine. And that's some of the reason that people just tend to go for those options.
And Dan, you mentioned the kind of problems that Australians have with game streaming services, which I find interesting because one of the things that I've done on my admittedly super cheap Chromebook is Xbox game streaming. And it's not flawless for sure.
Mm,
That you definitely get little bits of kind of glitchy stuff, and you need a decent connection to do it.
mm.
But it does work. And if I hook it up to an external monitor and I've got a gamepad there, it's just a conduit for this stuff. So they're already there and ahead of Steam.
So one of the things I found with specifically with Xbox Game Pass on Chromebooks is the controller button mapping on the Series X controller isn't right. So when you jump in, and no matter what game it is, the left thumbstick seems to go right down and stuff like that. So there's incompatibilities there with things like controller mappings. So it's not a complete seamless experience. I've seen them fix a lot of the bugs and stuff like that, and you are only streaming at 720p, so sometimes the graphics can get a bit.
Mm.
So it's a great alternative, and things like GeForce Now, like you can play for an hour for free on that service. Like I think Pentanet over in WA is hosting that for Nvidia, and you can use that, and that's actually the same deal. Like it's actually really good quality, and they can actually go up to 1080p if you've got like the connection for it. So while I say that they're not quite there are options, but you do tend to run into some barriers if your connection drops or things like that. Whereas, I mean, Steam on Chromebooks obviously local. It's an option, and yeah, if you're only playing like Terraria or something like that, it's an option.
So this is
Does
why I favour Antstream.
does Stadia work on Chromebooks? Google
So,
Stadia?
well, obviously, we don't have Stadia here. Google hasn't opened that door, but yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah.
It works really well. Before they closed the door, and a lot of they seem to sort of shut down some of the VPN options because I actually used to subscribe to Stadia Pro, and on a VPN it was actually decent. I
So
was playing.
you're the one.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't know what they've done since I left because I haven't haven't done it for like a year. But I actually bought Red Dead Redemption 2, and I was playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and it was quite a good experience. So, and that was over VPN. So I was actually pretty impressed with that option. So yeah, it definitely works. It's native. Google's obviously done a bit there to hopefully streamline that process, but it's obviously the country restriction is not us.
So, Dan, do you think we'll hear more about this at Google I/O in May? And do you think that we'll actually be jetting to Mountain View in May?
Oh, I can only dream of jetting to Mountain View in May. It's been a few years. But we'll definitely hear more about it in May. I mean, we've only got an alpha release of Steam on Chromebooks so far, and there's only like 4 or 5 that are compatible with it at the moment. So definitely going to hear more about it. So, and I'd love to see a beta release that maybe expands the options to some of the lower end Chromebooks and Chromeboxes. So I mean, I have a Chromebox that I use at work during my lunch breaks to sort of write and surf the web and all that sort of stuff. So I'd love to have Steam on it to throw a bit of low end gaming at it.
Anything else you're kind of hoping to see at I/O? I mean, we're starting to get some early Pixel rumors, and obviously there'll be OS upgrades as well because it is a developer conference.
Yeah, I mean, IO is always the big show for laying the groundwork, and I think we're going to see a lot of groundwork on the Android 12L for big screen devices and also foldables, because there's always the Pixel foldable rumor from last year, which failed to eventuate, and is apparently now on track for this year. So I think we're going to see a lot more in terms of large screen devices. We're going to see a hell of a lot more on Stadia because Google's going into their white labeling of the service for game companies rather than as a whole sort of service themselves. So there's going to be a lot to come at Google I/O this year, and I think with Google is starting to come together, they're starting to hit more of those targets, and we may get a few more interesting announcements as we approach up.
I'm hoping they'll show off or do a little bit more with Tensor with their own processor family
Mm.
because so far they talked a big talk, and not that the Pixel 6 phones are bad, but they talked a big talk with that. But we've not entirely seen an awful lot that says, yeah, Tensor's this big next gen jump that they were claiming yet.
Yeah, I mean the foundries are essentially Samsung, so it's
Hmm.
an Exynos based system. It's obviously their first chip, but they have over the last 5 to 7 years been hiring chip designers of note, and they've been getting there. But obviously, there's going to be a couple of years. I mean, we're not talking Apple coming out of the gate with an M1 Ultra here or anything like that. Google tends to take it a little bit slower to ramp up their hardware, and I think we've seen stuff on their server, Tensor stuff for years, every year. It doesn't really mean much to us consumers in that respect, but the phones with Tensor now is starting to make a little bit more sense for the average consumer. And I'm really hoping to see some more about what the special source of Tensor can do for consumers.
So speaking of phones specifically, this week we've also seen the debut of yet more Samsung phones. It's clearly mid-range frenzy time. So we've just seen the new iPhone SE, and now we've got new Galaxy A series phones. Dan, is it worth getting excited about the mid-range phones of 2022?
Look, I always look at mid-range phones as being around about 2 to 3 years behind, and when you're talking that sort of respect, the Galaxy S20 and stuff
Hmm.
like that were hell of a phone. So if you can get that sort of hardware in a decent new body with a brand new battery, great color screen, I mean, Samsung's known for that. So I'm always excited for the Galaxy A series, like the Galaxy J and the F series. Let's leave those alone. But yeah, the Galaxy A series over the last few years has just become one of those hot properties that sort of excites even like mainstream Samsung users. Like it's for, strange that their mid range phones have become that good.
But I think everyone's have really. Like it's fascinating. The flagships are the ones that we talk about that grab the headlines. Everyone goes, "Oh, new iPhone, new foldable, new this, new that." You look at the retail numbers. The ones that people go into stores and buy are the mid-range. They're the Galaxy A series phones. They're the iPhone SEs. They're the lower cost, Oppos and Realmes and things like that. They sell in big numbers.
Yeah, because obviously great specs, great price. I mean, I personally can't see a reason why you wouldn't. I mean, I like to go see what's happening in the camera and stuff like that on the higher end phones. But as I said, you're getting a lot of those features, like on the mid range phones as well. I mean, some of the night photography may not quite hit the same notes or some of that sort of respect, but I mean, a lot of the features are there, and you're getting some great results. And I remember my 2019 and 2018 phones. I was even getting good results out of the photography then. So why not? Like, I really have no issue with people getting excited about Galaxy A series or even mid-range phones in general. It
So,
really is good.
what do you rate as the best mid-range Android phones at the moment?
So Samsung Galaxy A series really do set the standards. I mean, Samsung has really nabbed the top spot as the manufacturer to really go for. But the one in the mid range that most people sort of turn to are the Nokia and the Motorola.
Yeah.
And it's
Mm.
mainly because they've really got a great, clean experience. It's just Android. And Nokia has that great, it's ready to update with all the security updates, feature updates, almost essentially as soon as Google releases them. A little bit back and forth, but yeah, they tend to get them out fairly quickly. Motorola, again, more to quarterly releases on their software, but they do tend to keep them up to date, and they're well priced. They're good hardware. Motorola phones, Nokia phones, they're great for handing to kids or someone who doesn't need the highest end fragile flagship or anything like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. The Edge 20 phones that Motorola put out not that long ago are really nice,
Mm.
solid little devices. I'm surprised, even though, I mean, I suppose it depends on how you define mid range. I'm surprised you didn't name drop the Pixel 6 there.
I float back and forth on the Pixel 6 as a mid range phone because it comes down to price and it really is in that conversation.
Hmm.
But I always have that mental image of it being a flagship, and I always forget it. It's one of those phones that it's hard to categorize because Google's priced it as a mid range device and then put all these flagship features, and the hardware is like really you can't argue it's along the same lines as a flagship phone. So I just keep forgetting it.
Now, we were discussing Samsung, and they've been in a bit of hot water of late around benchmark cheating, which is one of those things that has seemed to be a thing with mobiles for years and years and years, and we've seen so many other companies fall foul of it. Samsung has allegedly been doing its cheating a little bit differently, hasn't it, Dan?
Yeah, oh, well, it basically has been gaming the benchmarks, but we all obviously base our purchasing off benchmarks, so it's a very important thing. But I mean, essentially, they've been gaming the service, so are using what's basically called a gaming optimization service, which throttles some of the games, and once it detects that there's something like Geekbench specifically running, it opens up the throttles and lets you go to town. So not quite as legit when it comes to that sort of getting a proper benchmark against the rest of the services you'd expect.
So,
But
just to split hairs, is it specifically seeing that Geekbench is running and turning the throttle off,
Yes.
or does it only turn the throttle on when it's particular game? So it's seeing that particular app because okay, that's dodgy. If it's not just a category of apps, but it's this is a benchmark, I better ramp up. Yeah, that's dodgy.
Yeah, that seems to be like I obviously didn't do the tests.
Yeah,
I'm not that quite that technically minded, but it seems to be the way that as soon as it detects benchmark, it literally opens up the throttles and
yeah.
lets you go to town.
But the two really important points to make here. Firstly, this is sort of the reverse of the way everyone else has juiced a benchmark if they've done it, which has usually been to say, "Hey, I can see this as a benchmark. not just release the brake, but pedal to the floor. They've actually overclocked their processors. Samsung has not done that. But also, its game optimization service, despite the name, is not just optimizing games. It's optimizing just about everything. It's a list of about 10,000 apps, and it's loads and loads of common apps that nobody would ever call a game. And this creates a kind of a weird inverse problem because the Geekbench score on those phones is probably quite accurate for what that hardware is capable of. They've basically taken the brake off. But then when you come to use the phone, your experience is going to be degraded because it's throttled. Dan, has Samsung said why they did this beyond we wanted better Geekbench scores?
I mean, they have gone through a little bit of a process about explaining why they're actually doing it. But it comes down to basically optimization of the service itself. So getting better battery life and stuff like that. Obviously, you don't need the taps open to run everything. Most games will run quite fine if they throttle it by 30% or something like that, which is basically what's happening. So it's really, I'm hard pressed to really go to town on it because previous offenders like OnePlus have obviously done things like what you've described, but Samsung's done it a different way, and I'm really,
Look, I will come down on them a little harder. I'm sure they're surprised. If only because it also opens up this issue that I certainly, and I'd be interested in your insights on this actually, that I've noticed with this year's Samsung phones, and this doesn't just affect this year's phones for what it's worth. Game Optimizer has been a thing on Samsung phones, I think back to the S10 if I'm remembering correctly, quite a few generations. But for this year's phones notably, their battery life for flagships is not superb. It's not woeful, but it's not good. It's not right up there with what Google can do with the Pixels, for example. And when you consider that those are battery life figures, certainly from the way that I tested, because that was before this was an apparent thing, were throttled back, were theoretically battery saving. And what that means is these are phones where the battery life actually is probably even worse.
Yeah, that's definitely valid. Everything. I've got nothing extra to add. I mean, yeah, as you say, the current crop of Galaxy S22 series phones, not great. It's not bad. Like it's a day, you'll get a day on the S22 Ultra. You get close to that on every other phone. So it's not bad per se, but yeah, if they took it off, like, so as I say, like I'm hard pressed to sort of, if it's creating a solution to a problem, I'm not that hard pressed to really ping them on it.
I guess it sort of comes down to how much extra capacity those processors have and what other flagships are doing with it. They have said, though, that they are actually going to release patches to remove this service, to let people let rip if they want to. By the sounds of it, I'm guessing that's not a patch you'd be willingly applying.
Oh, look, I'll play with any patch Samsung puts out. And they've already started in South Korea. There's already software rolling out now which actually allows you to manipulate the game optimization service, whether you want to turn that off, open up the throttles, whatever you want. So they are actually getting on it. But yeah, it's just one of those things that I don't really gain that much on my phone.
So really, all they needed to do to have avoided this in the first place was just to have an option buried deep down in the settings that lets you turn this off.
Exactly. 100% agree. And actually talk about it. So maybe actually
leave it on by default.
Announce it, like
but
not leave it as a shadow service that wasn't really there.
But leave it on by default, but if you look in the power set, if you look hard enough, you can find it. And then they could honestly say, well, look, we did it for your benefit, but we didn't hide it. There's the setting. It wouldn't have been that hard. They must have had discussions somewhere where someone was saying, this is a bad idea. And someone else went, shut the hell up, man. We're just going to hide it. I don't know the Korean translation for that, but roughly.
I hate to have on a point, but I do think it's worse than that because it's not just games.
Yeah.
It's all well and good to say, oh, well, I don't play games on my phone or I don't play many games on my phone. But it's not just games. It's
a fair point.
Virtually every app that most people are regularly going to use, they will see degraded performance. And I think that also matters beyond the benchmarks. I think there is some use in benchmarks. You're right, Dan. They're not the be-all and end-all of why you should pick a phone. But they can have a useful comparative space. But if I'm saying, right, well, I know the S22's got this processor and this other phone that I'm looking at has the same processor, so they should be about the same in performance terms. Well, maybe not, because Samsung might be pulling the brake on you every time you go on social media or the web, or you're doing your email, you're doing anything else with it. I think that is a bigger problem. I think this is something, as you say, Adam. Yeah, they knew they were doing something dodgy because it's hidden,
Mm.
but I do think it's a bigger problem than just gaming.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. It's, I mean, I say I don't game, so yeah, that's not a problem. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If you're doing anything and the phone is doing it not when you're aware of it, as you say, Adam, there should be an option there to turn it off. Like, you should have that control. And as an Android user, that's one of the reasons I use Android, for that sort of control. And yeah, it's disappointing that they didn't. Also, didn't tell anyone about it, and it's taken 4 years for it to really come to light that it's really a problem of this scale.
So it's a bit of an apple jerk move, is what you're saying, if you read between the
Yeah,
lines.
basically.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Dan for joining us.
Anytime, I love coming and talking to you, gentlemen.
You have mistaken us for gentlemen once again. Hopefully you won't
I
make a
think
mistake.
you're on the wrong podcast, man.
Yeah. Hopefully you won't make a mistake with the Vertical Hold 3 questions Doom. You have faced them before. You know what to expect. I'll ask all three. You can answer them in any order you like, but you have already answered one already, so I'm going to modify it ever so slightly. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media online? And the big contentious question outside the hamburger eating ability, what's your secret skill or ability, and why does it make you special?
You can find me writing at EFTM.com, and you can always find me on social media anywhere with Frog Hollow with a PH. My special skill obviously is eating a lot of hamburgers, but look, I'm willing to give anything a go as long as it doesn't involve heights.
Fearless Dan, we shall call you. And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And thanks everyone for joining us once again. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice to help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
You got me to talk about, you hear me? I'm here to talk about the F1 McLaren Google deal, right? I'm such a noted F1 fan.
Something to do with cars.
You'll have to explain to Alex that F1 is not just a key on the keyboard.